sky over Alexandria, Virginia trembled with silence, then cracked open. What happens when America's quiet neighborhoods become battlefields of invisible wars? Sirens cut the stillness. Drones hummed above their red sensors, glowing like the eyes of unseen predators. Floodlights shattered the dark as ICE tactical units surrounded an old apartment block near the river. Every window was sealed, every door reinforced. Inside, a man paced, nervous, waiting, perhaps sensing that his final hour had come. His name, Ismael Enrique Mendoza Flores. His codename, El Calaco. To the world, another ghost of MS-13. To law enforcement, the keystone of a sprawling network that stretched from San Salvador to suburban America. Intelligence units had tracked him for months. Phone intercepts, cash transfers, whispers in detention centers. His trail cut across 6 states and 2 borders, merging human trafficking, extortion, and narcotics into one dark ecosystem. Tonight, that web would be torn apart. At 02:43 a.m., the strike began. Tactical boots hit wet asphalt in perfect rhythm. ICE, DEA, and DHS agents moved like clockwork, silent, synced, surgical. The steel door of the target building burst inward under the pressure of a hydraulic ram. Inside, chaos erupted, blinding flashes, deafening blasts, screams swallowed by the roar of commands. Hands where we can see them. El Calaco froze. For a heartbeat, he hesitated, one hand drifting toward his waistband, toward the gun he'd carried for years. But the flashbang detonated before he could move. White light devoured the room, then faded into the outline of agents closing in. Within seconds, he was on the floor, restrained his defiance, replaced by something colder recognition. The empire he'd built on fear had finally collapsed. Outside, blue and red strobes reflected off rain-soaked pavement. Neighbors filmed from windows, their faces pale in the glow. The footage would soon dominate morning broadcasts, another chapter in America's war against organized terror inside its own borders. But what unfolded that night was not just an arrest. It was a message, a demonstration that under President Donald Trump's renewed Zero Shadow initiative, the United States had no safe havens left for transnational crime. Analysts at Reuters and BBC later confirmed that Flores was more than a local enforcer. He was the logistics brain behind cross-border arms and drug routes, feeding both the Gulf Cartel and MS-13 cells in Los Angeles. Defense News described the operation as a domestic counter-terrorist maneuver executed with military precision. Yet the question lingered, how many others like him were already embedded across the country? By dawn, Alexandria returned to its fragile calm. The hum of helicopters faded. The street was washed clean, but the fear remained a quiet reminder that safety is a shadow that must be constantly defended. In the war between security and freedom, who decides how far the state should go to protect its people? A low growl of engines echoed through the narrow streets as dawn crept over the Potomac. The raid was over, but its shockwaves were only beginning. What looked like a simple arrest had in truth detonated a chain reaction stretching from Virginia's quiet suburbs to the cartel enclaves of Mexico and beyond. The moment El Calaco was handcuffed, encrypted devices across 3 continents went dark. A network had been severed, and every silence it created told investigators that they'd hit the nerve center. El Calaco's capture was more than tactical success, it was symbolic. For months, federal intelligence units under the Department of Homeland Security had traced him using a joint AI-driven platform integrating ICE, DEA, and FBI data. That system quietly rolled out under President Trump's Homeland Security Revitalization Act, linked human sources, surveillance drones, and financial algorithms into one machine of relentless tracking. Reuters later revealed that Flores' movements were flagged by the same predictive model used to identify terror suspects on US soil. When the steel door splintered, it wasn't just ICE entering his apartment, it was America's entire national security architecture striking in unison. Inside, agents found more than weapons. They uncovered coded notebooks, counterfeit IDs, and a small drive containing blueprints for ghost routes, hidden smuggling channels across the southern border used by MS-13 and cartel subcontractors. By 5 a.m., Homeland Security Command in Washington had already linked these findings to a major investigation stretching across Maryland, Texas, and California. A second ICE team intercepted a fleeing vehicle connected to the operation. The chase, captured on aerial drone footage later verified by BBC and DW, ended in a wooded area outside the Beltway. Inside the car were 2 of El Calaco's lieutenants, one carrying $220,000 in cash and 2 encrypted phones. Within hours, analysts cracked fragments of data revealing transactions routed through offshore accounts in Belize, Hong Kong, and Cyprus. Defense News described it bluntly. This wasn't just a criminal bust, it was the dismantling of an international logistics hub masquerading as gang activity. Jane's Defense Weekly added that the precision and coordination of the raid reflected a fusion between law enforcement and counterintelligence operations once reserved for war zones. At Quantico, FBI digital forensics teams began extracting files, reconstructing deleted conversations. One name surfaced repeatedly, Sombra believed to be the handler coordinating MS-13's cash flow into crypto networks. Another lead pointed toward a warehouse in El Paso suspected of storing arms shipments disguised as freight containers. But even as the evidence mounted, the human element of the story bled through. Neighbors described Flores as quiet a man who waved at children and never raised suspicion. To them, the raid shattered a comforting illusion that monsters always live somewhere else. As the morning light poured over the scene, reporters asked the inevitable question if one of America's most wanted gang leaders could hide in plain sight what other threats were quietly thriving beneath the surface. In the end, the image of El Calaco's arrest became a symbol not just of law enforcement triumph, but of a deeper unease. Technology had given the government an all-seeing eye, but at what cost? The line between freedom and surveillance had blurred once more. The convoy carrying Flores to a secure facility rolled out just as school buses began their routes. Parents watched from sidewalks, wondering if this was victory or just another reminder of how fragile peace in America had become. By the time morning news rolled across American screens, the arrest of Ismael Enrique Mendoza Flores El Calaco had already become a symbol of both victory and unease. The flashing lights, the tactical precision, the headlines reading MS-13 leader captured in Virginia raid all painted a picture of justice served. But beneath that narrative, something deeper was unraveling. What if the fall of one warlord was merely the spark of something far more dangerous? Inside the fortified ICE command center in Washington, data analysts worked around the clock. Flores' seized electronics revealed fragments of a much larger network, an encrypted communication web connecting gang lieutenants, money couriers, and foreign suppliers. Each decoded message opened a new door: arms shipments, rerouted through Guatemala fake charities, laundering funds in Miami, and anonymous digital wallets sending millions in cryptocurrency to obscure recipients. A source close to the investigation told BBC News that the intelligence from the raid had triggered at least 7 follow-up operations across the US and Central America. ICE field units in Dallas, Los Angeles, and Newark moved in unison. Overnight, 38 suspects were detained. Some were enforcers, others were accountants, tech specialists, or recruiters hiding behind the facade of legitimate jobs. Defense News noted how unprecedented the coordination had become. The operation blurred the line between law enforcement and intelligence warfare. Drones that once tracked terrorists in the Middle East were now mapping urban corridors in Chicago and Houston. AI-driven threat models originally designed for the Pentagon were recalibrated to trace narcotics flows and human smuggling trails. As dawn broke over the Capitol, President Donald Trump stepped before reporters at the White House Rose Garden. His message was brief but unmistakable. Under this administration, we don't just arrest criminals, we dismantle the systems that protect them. That soundbite broadcast by Reuters and DW became the defining quote of the day. It was a declaration not only of justice, but of intent. The Zero Shadow Initiative had entered its next phase, targeting the financial scaffolding behind MS-13's empire. The Treasury Department and Department of Justice began freezing assets tied to shell companies across Central America and the Caribbean. Behind the scenes, a quiet tension spread among federal agencies. For every victory, there came a question: how far could domestic surveillance go before liberty itself began to erode? The Guardian published an editorial warning of a creeping normalization of counterterrorism tactics inside US borders. Yet the counterpoint was chilling. Without such measures, MS-13 would still be recruiting in high schools, still smuggling fentanyl-laced cocaine through hidden pipelines. Human stories began to emerge amid the chaos. In El Salvador, families described young men recruited by Flores' network under the promise of American visas. In Maryland, residents recalled nights of silence broken by sudden bursts of violence, a reminder that peace in the suburbs could vanish in a heartbeat. Al Jazeera interviewed a former gang member who admitted that El Calaco was not just feared, he was trusted. He built loyalty with money and fear alike. Each revelation widened the map of complicity. What started as a midnight raid had become a geopolitical investigation spanning hemispheres. And as ICE Director Thomas Homan told DW, this is not about one man. This is about the architecture of modern crime, the fusion of gang, cartel, and digital warfare. Still, one question lingered in the minds of many Americans watching from afar: if law enforcement could reach into encrypted networks' financial systems and private communications to hunt criminals who would guard the line between safety and surveillance. Washington woke to the storm. Satellite trucks lined Pennsylvania Avenue, camera lenses aimed at the podium outside Homeland Security headquarters. The nation wanted clarity. What had begun as a midnight arrest in Alexandria was now unfolding into a geopolitical shockwave. The capture of El Calaco wasn't just a headline, it was a mirror reflecting the underbelly of a global system that had quietly fused violence, finance, and technology. President Donald Trump appeared at the morning briefing, flanked by the Secretary of Homeland Security and the FBI director. His tone was unyielding. "We have dismantled a threat that stretched across borders and corrupted communities. The United States will not be held hostage by gangs or their global backers." Reuters reported the statement echoed through European capitals, where NATO intelligence analysts were already comparing MS-13's logistics web to the paramilitary networks seen in the early stages of hybrid warfare. Jane's Defense Weekly observed that the gang's encrypted communication channels and drone-assisted smuggling methods resembled the same decentralized command structures used by non-state actors in modern conflicts. In response, the administration initiated Operation Sentinel Veil, a nationwide security surge targeting suspected transnational nodes. ICE, DEA, and FBI fusion centers were linked under one directive, while Treasury and Cyber Command established real-time data coordination to identify cross-border financial anomalies. DW reported that the campaign extended to diplomatic outreach. Mexico and Guatemala were briefed under new bilateral security terms. Yet as the US flexed its enforcement power, Europe watched cautiously. The Guardian questioned whether such sweeping domestic surveillance models might set precedents for expanded state power elsewhere. Meanwhile, the human narrative began to reclaim center stage. In neighborhoods across Virginia, community members placed flowers at street corners where gunfights once erupted. Families of victims spoke through tears, calling the arrest justice years in the making. But amid the relief was unease. Some feared that the victory would invite retaliation. Inside the ICE command hub, analysts reviewed satellite data showing unusual activity along the southern border, small convoys moving under night cover communications traffic spiking between El Salvador and Texas. Al Jazeera cited sources within regional intelligence who suspected that rival factions were preparing reprisals for the Alexandria raid. Political pressure intensified. Senators demanded hearings on border resilience, while civil liberties groups warned against the creeping militarization of federal agencies. The tension revealed a fault line at the heart of America's security doctrine. Could a nation preserve freedom while waging a perpetual internal war against invisible enemies? Defense News highlighted that the arrest's timing coincided with Washington's renewed focus on domestic resilience amid rising global instability, Russia's escalation in Eastern Europe, Iran's shadow operations in the Middle East, and China's cyber offensives against U.S. infrastructure. To allies, the Alexandria operation symbolized American resolve. To critics, it was a warning that the war on terror had simply evolved into a war without borders. As dusk settled over Washington, headlines shifted from triumph to introspection. In coffee shops and living rooms, people debated whether the government's growing power to monitor, predict, and strike was a necessary evolution or a dangerous precedent. And beneath it all, one haunting thought lingered: if America's strength lay in its ability to see everything, what happens when it begins to see too much? The war had gone silent. No gunfire, no sirens, only the quiet hum of machines sifting through oceans of data. Inside a fortified complex outside Washington, analysts from ICE, the FBI, and Cyber Command watched digital maps bloom with red pulses. Each light was a lead bank transfer border crossing encrypted chat. The new front line wasn't drawn in blood or borders, but in bandwidth. Jane's Defense Weekly described it as a battlefield built of code and currency. Forensic teams decrypted seized devices from El Calaco's network, revealing plans that went beyond gang operations. Hidden among the messages were financial links to shipping companies in Panama, private contractors in Guatemala, and cryptocurrency wallets connected to European shell firms. Reuters confirmed that some of these transactions matched accounts previously flagged by NATO intelligence for suspected Russian laundering activity, a sign that organized crime and geopolitical sabotage might be quietly intertwining. Under President Trump's directive, Operation Sentinel Veil expanded. ICE field offices received digital tasking orders through an AI system codenamed ArgusNet, designed to correlate suspicious activity across law enforcement, telecoms, and customs. It was America's most ambitious domestic intelligence integration since 9/11. Yet, as Defense News reported, success breeds shadows. Civil liberty advocates warned that such deep surveillance blurred the distinction between policing and control. The Guardian published leaked documents suggesting the data sweep occasionally flagged innocent citizens due to predictive errors. Homeland Security countered, insisting that no tool could be perfect, but without ArgusNet, the hydra of modern crime would grow back faster than it could be cut. Inside the system, the details were chilling. A decrypted chat revealed that El Calaco's lieutenants had planned coordinated strikes on federal witnesses and prosecutors if he were captured. ICE agents quietly increased security at courthouses. Another thread mentioned Ghost Tide, a planned migration surge at the border to overwhelm law enforcement and divert resources. DW reported that federal analysts now viewed these networks as hybrid threats, criminal cartels acting with the precision and digital discipline of military cells. They adapt like insurgencies, one source said, using social media, dark web logistics, and human desperation as weapons. Meanwhile, the FBI uncovered evidence that gang recruiters were exploiting refugee corridors in Honduras and Guatemala, offering families safe passage northward in exchange for debt bondage. The discovery forced humanitarian agencies to recalibrate their border operations. Al Jazeera's field reports from Tegucigalpa showed parents pleading for help, torn between survival and exploitation. Back in Washington, President Trump addressed the National Security Council. This isn't a local problem, he declared. It's an invasion by stealth, an economic, digital, and human war, and America will win it. His words broadcast live echoed through the evening. But even as the machinery of justice advanced, the emotional toll deepened. Agents worked 20-hour shifts, families lived under threat, and communities hovered between fear and relief. The question persisted: how long could a democracy fight shadows before becoming one itself? By nightfall, a convoy of armored transports carried fresh evidence from Alexandria to Calaco for decryption. Each file promised answers, but also new ghosts. The war had changed form, but it hadn't ended. Because the enemy was no longer just on the streets. It was in the code, in the airwaves, in the invisible systems that keep America alive. And the next strike might not come from a gun, but from a signal. The transport convoy rolled through the early dawn mist, its armored silhouettes fading into the pale light over the Potomac. El Calaco sat in silence behind reinforced glass wrists, bound eyes cold. The man who once commanded hundreds of foot soldiers now had nothing but the echo of his own defeat. Yet in that quiet stare, the agents beside him sensed something unsettling, not fear, but calculation. Behind them, America stirred. News anchors replayed the Alexandria raid in endless loops. Headlines screamed MS-13's American empire crumbles. But beneath the noise, deeper truths whispered. The hydra wasn't dead, only one head had been severed. For every arrest, new cells emerged, adapting, migrating, evolving. The war was becoming self-sustaining. At FBI Quantico, the seized evidence began to reveal its final secret, a network labeled Noche Azul Blue Night. It mapped smuggling lanes stretching from Chiapas through Dallas to Chicago, mirroring trade routes of legitimate cargo. Jane's Defense Weekly called it a parallel economy of the underworld. Hidden inside shipping manifests investigators found shipments of small arms chemical precursors, and even American-made drones modified for payload delivery. Reuters confirmed that some of these drones matched models recently used by criminal factions in Central America to attack police convoys. Defense News warned that the fusion of cartel logistics and military-grade tactics represented the most advanced domestic threat since 9/11. In response, President Donald Trump ordered a classified review of border surveillance strategy, expanding aerial patrols and cyber defense coordination between ICE and NORAD. The goal was simple but monumental: no blind spots, no safe zones. Yet, as The Guardian noted, such measures raised alarms in Congress. Lawmakers questioned how long the American homeland could live under a state of permanent vigilance. Amid political tension, a quieter story unfolded. In Alexandria, the same street where the raid had erupted just nights earlier, children rode their bikes past the taped-off door. The air still smelled faintly of tear gas, but life somehow resumed. A mother who had hidden her son under a table during the raid told BBC News, "When I saw those lights, I thought it was war. Then I realized it was protection." This was the paradox of modern America's safety secured through perpetual readiness. ICE agents exhausted but resolute returned to base, knowing there would be no victory parade. Their war was not fought for glory, but for silence, the kind of silence where families could sleep again. As the sun rose over Washington, the Homeland Security Secretary stepped before cameras announcing that the operation had neutralized a key node in an international web of violence. Applause followed, but inside the agencies nobody celebrated. They had seen the patterns. They knew new names would surface, new threats would mutate, and new cities would be tested. Still, hope endured. The alliance between law enforcement and intelligence had shown what was possible when precision replaced panic. Communities had seen justice. Victims had seen accountability. America had proven once again that no empire built on fear could last forever. Yet as the transport van carrying El Calaco disappeared into a secure tunnel beneath Quantico, one question remained, one that echoed through every silent command room, every flickering monitor, every restless night. If the war on the shadows never ends, how long can a nation built on freedom keep fighting without losing itself to the darkness it hunts? The capture of Ismael Enrique Mendoza Flores, known as El Calaco, marked one of the most decisive blows against MS-13's transnational empire. The Alexandria raid, executed under President Donald Trump's Zero Shadow initiative, exposed a criminal web spanning the Americas, linking cartel syndicates, cryptocurrency laundering, and hybrid warfare tactics. Through intelligence from Reuters, BBC, and Defense News, the operation revealed that America's war against organized crime had evolved into a digital conflict fought through surveillance, AI-driven analytics, and interagency coordination. But victory came with questions. Civil liberties groups warned of overreach as ICE, DEA, and Cyber Command merged capabilities once reserved for counterterrorism. Still, the operation showcased a new doctrine security through precision and integration. As El Calaco disappeared into custody, America confronted its own reflection, a superpower fighting enemies that no longer carry flags, only codes. The war on crime had become a war on shadows, and its outcome would define how freedom survives in an age of total vigilance.